House Democrats have repeatedly made clear throughout this Congress that we will find bipartisan common ground with our Republican colleagues on any issue, whenever and wherever possible, in order to make life better for everyday Americans, while at the same time push back against Republican extremism whenever necessary. We haven't just talked about bipartisan cooperation, we've leaned into it on issue after issue after issue, including making sure that America did not default on our nation's debt for the first time in American history, that we've twice avoided government shutdowns, and that we've worked hard to meet the needs of the American people, including securing $16 billion in disaster assistance for American families who've been devastated by extreme weather events. House Democrats continue to make clear that we will always put people over politics and search for bipartisan common ground to solve problems for hardworking American taxpayers. But the Republican extremism is out of control. Extreme MAGA Republicans have shown zero interest in solving problems on behalf of everyday Americans. Zero interest in dealing with the economy. Zero interest in confronting inflation, which is on the way down, but still requires us to look into things like price gouging that sticks the American people with inflated costs in terms of consumer goods. Zero interest in dealing with those challenges. Zero interest in dealing with creating a more affordable environment for middle-class folks and all those who aspire to be part of the middle class. Zero interest in confronting issues connected to public safety in a meaningful way. And certainly zero interest as it relates to dealing with the gun violence epidemic that continues to plague the American people. It is unacceptable, it is un-American, it is unconscionable that everyday Americans continue to be gunned down by individuals, as was the case in Las Vegas yesterday, who should not have access to weapons of war. Which are not used to hunt deer, they are used to hunt human beings, young people, and far too often children. It's time for the extreme MAGA Republicans to partner with Democrats on common sense gun safety legislation to improve the security, the safety, and the well-being of the American people, as opposed to being active obstructionists in preventing the Congress from doing common sense things like universal criminal background checks to protect the safety of the American people. Questions?
Leader Jeffries.
Thanks.
Leader Jeffries, would you agree with, Democrats agree with President Biden's position that you'd be willing to accept changes to the immigration process in exchange for aid to Ukraine?
We have clearly expressed an interest in making sure that we find a bipartisan, comprehensive path forward to sensible immigration reform that is consistent with American values, anchored in two principles. First, that we are a nation of immigrants, and that has been an incredibly important competitive advantage for America and our exceptionalism. Second, we are a nation anchored in the rule of law. Anything that's on the table, and we've seen nothing specific to evaluate, has to be consistent with those two deeply held American principles. it is unfortunate that extreme MAGA Republicans in the House and the Senate would rather side with the pro-Putin forces in this country than America's national security interests, which clearly rests with making sure that Ukraine is successful in defeating Vladimir Putin and Russian aggression. Specifically, in terms of what may be on the table, we'll have to evaluate anything that is presented to us or sent over by the Senate, but anything has to be consistent with those two deeply held American principles that I've articulated.
Leader Jeffries.
We're going to go back to this side. Thanks.
How likely do you think it is? How worried would you say you are that you will go home for the holidays without passing aid for Ukraine?
In my view, that would be completely and totally unacceptable. We have to stand with our allies all across the world. It's important that we stand with Israel in its existential fight to decisively defeat Hamas. It's important that we stand with Ukraine in an existential fight to push back Russian aggression. It's important that we provide humanitarian assistance to Palestinian civilians who are in harm's way in Gaza through no fault of their own. It's important that we stand with our allies in the Indo-Pacific, and it's important that we increase our military readiness in an increasingly dangerous world. It would be irresponsible legislatively for my Republican colleagues to decide that they're going to go home to celebrate the holidays when our allies continue to be involved in existential fights that relate directly to America's national security.
Leader Jeffries, quick question. What is your response to Speaker Johnson saying he wants to blur out the photos and then backtracking when talking about January 6th and January 16th and saying he wants to continue to release more footage of that day?
Extreme MAGA Republicans are not the party of law and order. They continue to demonstrate that they are the party of lawlessness and disorder.
The House is set to censure one of your members for the third time this year. Is it time to change rules on privilege resolutions?
Extreme MAGA Republicans continue to utilize tactics such as censuring Democratic members of Congress, burying their heads in the sand with respect to unlawful or unacceptable conduct by their own members, including but not limited to Marjorie Taylor Greene, and engaging in efforts to irresponsibly and illegitimately target President Joe Biden and his family. Why are extreme MAGA Republicans wasting so much time on these efforts to target Democratic members of Congress, target President Biden, target President Biden's family members? It's because the extreme MAGA Republicans have nothing to show for their narrow, fading, and decreasing majority. Nothing to show the American people. No progress on any issue of significance. No progress on the economy, no progress on healthcare, no progress on public safety, no progress on education, no progress on anything designed to improve the health, the safety, or the economic well-being of the American people. Instead, extreme MAGA Republicans are actively targeting Social Security, actively targeting Medicare, actively targeting reproductive freedom and a woman's freedom to make her own reproductive health care decisions, actively targeting the Affordable Care Act, and actively targeting our democracy. And they want to hide that extreme right-wing agenda from the American people. And that's why we continue to see censure resolution after censure resolution being brought to the floor. And next week, we're going to waste time on an illegitimate impeachment inquiry targeting President Biden and his family.
Speaking of impeachment, next week, the NDAA text just dropped. I'm curious, have you had a chance to review? It's a big bill, but have you had a chance to review the big things of it? And can I get your thoughts on if you think that the NDAA will pass by the time you guys break for holiday?
Yeah, we haven't had the opportunity to have that conversation as a caucus with the text now being in the public domain, but it's been a bipartisan process that we have been engaged in, led by the top Democrat on the Armed Services Committee, Adam Smith. And I believe that we have arrived at a place that is worthy of strong consideration for very strong support amongst the House Democratic Caucus. Thank you. Kevin, and then we'll go ahead.
You're meeting with Mayor Adams this afternoon. What's on the agenda? What do you want to see outcome of that?
Well, I look forward to my conversation with Mayor Eric Adams to talk about how we can improve the quality of life of the people of New York City, how we can address some of the challenges that we confront in New York City, particularly the affordable housing crisis, to talk about the progress that has been made under the leadership of Mayor Adams to significantly reduce gun violence and homicides in the city of New York, and the continuing efforts to address issues around property crime. And of course, to get an understanding from Mayor Adams as to where we're at in the context of the asylum seekers who have come to New York City in significant numbers over the last year and a half, and how we can continue to move that issue forward in a positive direction. Go back to this side and then we'll come over here. Yeah.
Thank you. You're well aware, excuse me, of the divisions in your caucus when it comes to the Israel-Palestine conflict. Another vote yesterday which highlighted those, and the lawmakers we're talking to say behind the scenes it's even worse. What are you doing as the leader of the party to kind of ease those tensions? Are you calling people in? Are you having meetings? Are there behind the scenes discussion? How are you going to ease those tensions?
Yeah, we'll continue to have conversations about a variety of national security issues, including the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. My view continues to be pretty straightforward. We've got to stand squarely and unequivocally with Israel in its effort to decisively defeat Hamas. We have to do everything possible to make sure that the hostages come back home safely to Israel, to America, and the other countries of origin throughout the world. We have to make sure that we are protecting Palestinian civilians who are in harm's way through no fault of their own, and surge humanitarian assistance to them, as well as civilians who are in harm's way in other parts of the region and the world. Those are principles that I think have been articulated clearly by President Biden and his administration, and principles that I support. We also will continue to have ongoing discussions about making sure that in an environment where there are outside forces with deeply held positions and a lot of turmoil and angst playing itself out in different parts of the country, that as members of Congress, we have a responsibility to lean into civility, not just amongst ourselves in terms of the House Democratic Caucus, but to lean into civility as it relates to how we communicate with our colleagues and set an example for others, because we certainly cannot count on the extreme MAGA Republicans led by people like Marjorie Taylor Greene or whoever it was that was the sponsor of the censure resolution that was debated yesterday. We can't count on them, as far as I can tell, to be principled in wanting an institution that is functional, that embraces bipartisanship, and that tries to find common ground. That will continue to fall on us as Democrats. I believe that Democratic members of the caucus have led the way in that regard, even as it relates to dealing with challenging issues, and we will continue to do that moving forward.
Earlier this week, a number of university presidents testified before the House. What was your reaction to that testimony? It's gotten pretty big criticism from Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah, I have not gotten the opportunity to actually see the testimony. However, I think it's important for every university leader to unequivocally make clear that anti-Semitism has no place on a single college campus in the United States of America or throughout the world, and that everything necessary should be done to crush anti-Semitism and to make sure that everyone on a college campus, whether you're Jewish or Muslim or Palestinian or African American or Latino or white or Asian American or a member of the LGBTQ plus community, everyone should feel safe on a college or university campus. And university leaders have a responsibility to make sure they're leaning in to confronting the explosion of hatred that we've seen in some instances and on some college campuses. It's also important that our extreme MAGA Republican colleagues actually join us in doing something meaningful about these issues. For instance, President Biden has put forth over 100 recommendations that could be implemented by the Congress to try to address the rising tide of anti-Semitism in the United States of America. House Republicans have not acted on a single one. In fact, what we've seen in some instances is the exact opposite. We want to strengthen the ability of the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights to pursue and address and confront and stamp out anti-Semitism on college campuses, anti-Arab hatred, racism, Islamophobia, homophobia, and all of these other issues. But if you just look at the anti-Semitism issue, right, where there is strong bipartisan concern for dealing with an unacceptable rise in anti-Jewish hatred. One of the things that we can do about it is making sure that the Department of Education of the United States of America and the relevant Office of Civil Rights has the resources and the capacity to address it. But extreme MAGA Republicans in the House actually want to gut and defang the Office of Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Education. Our Republican colleagues are not serious individuals, for the most part, on this issue or on any other issue of significance to the American people, because they're more interested in playing partisan political games. All right, last question.
Just wanted to ask about on appropriations. We still have no top line number, and I know this is something that's being discussed, but I wanted to see if you could kind of take an outlook right now. Does the fact that we don't have a top line number and we are just really weeks away from that first deadline indicate to you that we're facing down a year-long CR?
House Democrats have a top line number. Senate Democrats have a top line number. Senate Republicans have a top line number. The Biden administration has a top line number, and that top line number is the same. It relates to the agreement made in the Bipartisan Fiscal Responsibility Act. The issue of the top line spending number for the fiscal year 2024 appropriations process has already been resolved. But the extreme MAGA Republicans are running away from an agreement that the extreme MAGA Republicans themselves negotiated and insisted would be part of the discussions around preventing a catastrophic default on our debt. And so there's only one issue to be resolved here, which is for the House Republicans to come to the realization that we are not going to bend the knee to their extreme ransom demands and inflict devastating cuts to the health, the safety, and the economic well-being of the American people in a manner inconsistent with the Bipartisan Fiscal Responsibility Act that House Republicans themselves negotiated and supported, including the current Speaker of the House of Representatives. Thank you, everyone.